Have a Dovpo Odin Mini DNA 75, going to be tearing that down. I'm going to go relatively quickly through the teardown process and save my comments on design decisions, build quality, till the reassembly. So if you just want to see how I take it apart, that part should be fairly quick. So move the two pins, hinge pins, and the battery door comes off. I like to get that off first so it's just not rattling around. And then we have 4 screws. We'll need to undo here from the bottom plate. There are a lot of screws in this mod, so make sure you have a system knowing where they'll go, and try not to lose any. And I'll show you why towards the end. Luckily these are all pretty standard screw sizes, so if you do lose one, you'll be able to find one. It might take a little bit of searching on Amazon or DigiKey or whatnot, but so these front 2 screws that I've just taken one out and work on the second one, they connect to the bottom mount, not to the board. So after you get those these 4 screws done, this should just pop right out. You'll see it has some pins. You need to make sure these are all the way out, otherwise we won't be able to pull this off later. Now just 3 on the top. And for the most part, they actually use the same size screw. As you start doing the last one, the top will kind of spring up a little bit. Nothing to be concerned about. So and then just pull it up just enough to clear these pins on both sides. So after that's done, this is just held on friction. So I come from the bottom, just kind of hold on to it, put your thumb there, and just push forward a little. And it'll just kind of pop off. And then you can just work it out and down. And that's all there is to that. Next we have the battery contact and 510 assembly. So it's just 2 screws that holds this on. And there is a spring in there. Just make sure you don't lose it. It's the spring for the 510 connector. And then make sure those screws just drop out so they don't fall out on me later. So here's the spring for the 510, and actually that's the whole 510 pin. You see it comes out. And then in here, if you need to get to the positive contact, there's 2 screws. Bring this up a little bit closer. These 2 screws, and you'll notice this concave part, and it faces that pin. That's there to make room for the 510. So it does need to be put back on the same way. And there's a spring underneath this. It's not gonna shoot out and hit your face, but it will you start doing it, you'll see it. It wants to be free. All right. And here's your positive terminal. Now to remove the board. And normally there would be a screw here too. And once I get a new one, it will have 3 screws again. That is my fault, not Dovpo's. I fortunately dropped one on carpet and cannot find it when I was taking this apart. Luckily, it's just for holding it in place. It'll be fine until I get a new replacement. It's not making an electrical connection through it. It's doing its ground to the 510 through a wire. So those 3 screws, or 2 in this case, undone. The board, everything lifts right out. There is a spring here on the button. You could actually take this out if you want to. I wouldn't. They did put it there for a reason, to make the button a little bit stiffer, but it's not nothing holding in there, so it would be easy to fall and lose that. That is about as far as this is coming apart without a soldering gun. The screen bracket is just held on with friction, so this just pops right off. I'm not going to take the screen off. If you want to see how to replace the screen on a DNA board, check out my teardown of the Paranormal. It's relatively simple though. One thing to be aware of, make sure if you do touch the screen, you clean it real well, because there is a piece of glass or plastic. Not sure, it's probably plastic. So if you put a big old thumbprint on this, you're going to be staring at it until you take it apart again to clean it. So that's all there is to taking this mod apart. It's very simple, very easy to do. I'm actually very pleased with the quality. The soldered joints look fairly well done. They're not very messy. If ever need to replace the board, it's going to be very easy. It's just DNA 75 is already a pretty simple board. Even the 250C is. But it's just 4 solder connections if you burn out this board, something. Also, the whole thing, except for just a few plastic components, is, pretty sure it's extruded aluminum, but no sharp edges. I mean, these edges here have been rounded off a little bit. You're not going to cut yourself on this. It's all very well made. I'm sure this was made in China, but it just goes to show that Chinese manufacturing can be quality if you wish to pay for it, and apparently Dovpo does. It's probably the most serviceable mod I've ever dismantled. The only thing that could become a problem is if this 510 needs to be replaced, you're either going to need to get one from Dovpo, or you're going to have to fabricate a new top cap, maybe put a Fat Daddy low profile or some other 510 on it. On the bright side, unlike most 510s, there's really not a lot to go wrong. The spring wears out, you can replace the spring. This O-ring right here, keeps juice from getting inside the mod if your tank leaks. You could replace the O-ring. I guess the insulator could crack, or probably the most likely thing to damage it would be if you dropped it a number of times and you happen to just damage the threads. Possible you could re-tap it and clean it up a little bit in that case, though. Otherwise, it's very nothing magic, nothing super proprietary. With a DNA mod, that's what you're really buying. I mean, it's a DNA mod. Chip's going to be the same. Feature's going to be the same. The only difference between any DNA mod is going to be the casing around it. And they did a fantastic job with this. They also took safety in consideration. So let me go ahead and start putting this back together, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Incidentally, before I do, let me go ahead and take this spring out. I know the buttons have a little bit more play than some people like. If you want to, it'd be very easy to 3D print some new buttons. Just if you want to personalize it some more. So let me put this spring on. Put this down, and I lift it up a little bit just to make sure I've got the USB in there. So I better put this down, grab my I'll lift it back up. This screw is probably the most difficult just because you got that negative battery wire there. So you want to just barely tighten it. Don't even really start snugging it up until you get all the screws threaded. Should be 3. Again, I will feel free to mock me. I'm mocking myself. I can't believe I lost a screw. I haven't done that in ages. But like I say, in this instance, it's not really a big deal. So we got the board remounted, and after the board's mounted, I can flip it over and just make sure all the buttons are still clicky. I'm really excited they put a screen protector there. It's a nice touch. The screens are cheap, maybe $15 shipped, but I'd rather not have to replace one. Now, if that gets all scratched up, replacing that window might be a annoying little project. So inside this, see if I can get out of the light here. There's a pin right here. The spring will go in that. And then, of course, make sure that the concave part is pointing towards this pin at the front. And what this is doing, besides holding the spring in, is... Let me get this on first. And these are just some self-tapping screws, and they are going into plastic, so you just finger tight. You don't need to... It's not torquing down to lug nuts on your truck. Okay, and then this wire goes here. So the 510 pin, if it's pushed down all the way, it'll hit about here. So this is going to make sure that your 510 doesn't short against your battery and cause an auto fire if you have a tank with a long 510 pin on it. Also, another thing I liked is, you can see here, this plastic comes up a little bit more. It's going to keep the wire from coming over here and possibly getting frayed, and again, shorting, causing an auto fire. So they took into account that there is a moving component right here going up and down, so we want to make sure it doesn't hit anything, and they've done that. So that's a nice feature and interest of safety, or at least design decision. So that little pin, just like the other one, this pin here goes in the center of the spring, and then these will actually go over these posts. So these are some pretty heavy duty wires and pretty heavy duty solder joints, so you don't need to, it's not going to just snap, but you do want to not put any more strain on them than absolutely necessary. I'm being a little less careful than I normally would about that, but I know I'm going to take this apart again. So that's on, and then I'll take a look and just make sure my wires are routed the way I want, and that they are. I guess, let's see if you can see, if the wire got, the insulating got damaged, it could hit this, and that would be the positive terminal onto the negative, and that would actually cause a battery short, but it's unlikely. That isn't a moving component. I don't see how it would happen in usage. All right. So with that together, so this, again, it's a friction fit. Oh, let me get it from this side, it's a little bit easier to see. Actually, just kind of push it in. You don't have to line it up. We'll line it up later. There we go. And then just kind of slide it down. And I'll actually slide it a little bit further, as you can see right here, because when I put this on, then I can kind of do that. And then I'll put the bottom on first. What I'll do is these 4 screws. I wish they would have stuck with one type, like Torx or Phillips. And I think the reason they didn't is because they wanted to stick with common sizes and parts that you can get. And I will say I appreciate that more than trying to be consistent on the screw type, but and then 2 screws in the front. That's gonna be difficult, huh? I used to hate Torx, but I'm becoming to love it for these little tiny ones. Right, and then the top, and that just slides back in. All right, and then for the battery door, push it on and latch it. So it's like batteries in, and then these will drop right in. These are probably the only screws that are probably non-standard. If it came down to it, what I would probably do is get some grub screws and a Dremel and make some new ones. Hopefully I'll never lose them. And so there, and so it seems like the battery door is flimsy and rattles. It's just got a lot of play, but those are probably stainless steel pins. Aluminum body. I mean, you could break it, but you're going to have to try to. It's not going to just wear out. There we go. That's the Dovpo Odin Mini DNA 75C.